So let me just be the first to put my hand up and say that I have been guilty of everything that I'm talking about in this video. And what I am going to talk about is essentially the moralizing of food, which means that we don't fully understand the mechanisms of fat loss, which means that we lead ourselves into taking actions that mean that we're likely to put the weight back on that we lose, and even more. And I'm going to demonstrate that and why that's the case today. So here's our friend Peter. This guy is always dieting, and he always seems to talk about food in these terms. Good food, bad food. He's always detoxing. He's always eating clean. He's eating healthy. He always has to do a reset. Weekends are the time when he has a release, and therefore he falls off the wagon, and he loves to have a cheat day or cheat meal. Now, these are your classic dietary red flags. Anyone who talks about food in those terms typically does not understand the true mechanisms of fat loss, which I'm going to talk about. As a result of that, Peter is always stuck in these same cycles. Essentially, he's on a crash diet. That's where he's always eating good food, he's eating clean, he's detoxing. Then he ends up binging. That's when he's eating unhealthy, he's falling off the wagon. Basically, all those negative words that we talked about are the ones that he associates with these periods. As a result, here's what happens in those periods where he's crash dieting. Assuming that he's 100 kilograms, he might lose 10 kilograms of fat, but he might also lose 3 kilograms of muscle because he's been restricting so much to the point where his body's starting to break down tissue. So then what happens? Because he's been restricting so much, he needs that psychological release, hence the binge. And the binge can happen for a long time because he's fallen off the wagon. And so he gains 11 kilograms of fat, but just a kilogram of muscle. So assuming that he starts 100 kilograms, what's the result after doing 3 of these crash diets? Basically, he's 100 kilograms, starts at 25% body fat. He goes through these phases here of losing 10 kilograms and 3 kilograms of muscle before he gains 11 kilograms and 1 kilogram of muscle. And after 3 crash diets, he ends at 103 kilograms and 33% body fat, which is not where he wants to be at all. He wants to be the opposite. He wants to be that 90 kilograms that he went down to, and he wants to be ultimately between 10 to 12% body fat, which is where I try and get my clients before we focus on building muscle. So the big question is, what is the fix? Because we want to break this cycle. Peter thinks clearly that the only way to lose weight is to go on these crash diets and to moralize food, whereby in a crash diet, there's specific rules that he has to follow, and he needs to think of food on these extreme spectrums of good and bad, and if anything is going against the rules of said diet, he's cheating, he's been naughty, he's falling off the wagon. We want to break out of that cycle because, as we can see, it's caused him to actually gain a net of 3 kilograms and increase his body fat percentage. The first things first, let's stop moralizing food in this way. Let's not use these terms to describe food, because this is going to establish a very negative relationship with food, where you have these intense emotional drives and reactions to behave in a certain way. It's really important that we break this cycle. And what is the cycle? Peter gets excited about this new diet. He bans loads of food, whether it's carbs, whether it's fats, whether he's trying to get into ketosis, whether he's using a Zoe blood glucose monitor, whatever it is. He gets some initial success and feels great. But the thing is, he's thinking about those foods that he deems bad, the ones that he thinks are spiking his insulin and he thinks is making him fat, the ones that he thinks is kicking him out of ketosis. And because he thinks about them so much, there becomes a point in time where, snap, he binges. This binge, it can be a binge to begin with, but then that binge can be the moment where he's like, I'm not going back to that restrictive way of living. Before we know it, he's on big buckets of KFC, breakfast, lunch and dinner, and he starts to feel rubbish about himself. So what does he do? He has an idea. The way that he lost weight before was to ban certain foods, restrict them, etc. So it goes back to that initial burst of motivation whereby he repeats this cycle, and that's the cycle that we need to break. That being said, we really do need to understand fat loss. All of these diets that you read about, they do work. You do lose weight. But the reason why they work, if you were to put yourself in a laboratory and track your calorie expenditure and your calorie input, you will find that you will be in a calorie deficit whilst being on said diet. Okay, there is no two ways about that. You definitely would be. Just because you're not tracking calories does not mean they don't matter. We know that food contains calories. We know that the body expends calories. So therefore it should present A, logical, and B, it's backed up in the literature, that if you are in a calorie deficit, you will lose weight. And a calorie deficit is essentially that state whereby you are losing weight. That being said, no one ever loses weight in a calorie surplus. Please do comment below if there's any research that shows to the contrary, but I'm pretty sure that you will not find any. So what does that mean for us? It means that the only mechanism that we need to take advantage of is getting into a calorie deficit. That's the mechanism. We don't need to ban certain foods. We don't need to control hormones, insulin. We don't need to get into a fat burning state. When it comes to nutrition, we just need to ensure that we are consuming less than we are expending. And that's going to lead to weight loss. And provided we eat enough protein and strength train, we will lose just fat, which is perfect. Given that point, it means that we can create ourselves a diet whereby we can actually include some of these foods that we're moralizing against, whether it's bread, whether it's candy kittens, I love candy kittens, whether it's just having an IPA on a Friday night, which is coincidentally what I do as well. You can fit these things into your diet. But the most important thing is, because we want to focus on being healthy as well, we need to ensure that we're eating enough protein, that most of the time we're eating mainly minimally processed whole foods. So for example, your fruit, your veg, your starchy carbohydrates, ensure that they're prepared in a way that ensures that they remain nutritious. So we don't want them deep fried, for example. We want to grill our meats, maybe steam our vegetables. And if that's what we're doing most of the time, and the issue is most of the time you're not doing these things, then you will likely get to a stage where not only are you healthy, but if you're paying attention to the quantity of food that you are eating and adjusting it to ensure that you are losing weight, you're going to lose weight. It's as simple as that. That said, I want you to remember this. Health is defined by what you do most of the time, not what you abstain from. Your dieting phase does not need to resemble that of a UFC fighter who's trying to make a certain weight for their weigh-in. It's completely unnecessary, and you don't need to lose fat in some cases as they do so quickly. As a result of that, you don't need to try and identify with them in thinking that you're going to athlete levels of dedication by restricting and banning certain foods, because as we have seen, it's unnecessary, and that's exactly what can lead to you going through these cycles of binging and restricting. And you only need to look at someone like Ricky Hatton to show that this is the cycle that these guys actually go through themselves, and we do not want that. We need to ensure that we have a good relationship with food, which does not outright ban foods unless you are of course allergic to them or you have some life-threatening reaction to them. You are able to include foods that you are currently banning in your diet, and that's going to help you develop the skill of being balanced with your nutrition, which over the long term is going to lead to you actually being able to stick to a diet for longer, and in so doing you're not going to feel like you need to have a binge, a release, etc., because you're not banning foods anymore. You're including them into your diet, and that is leading to you having a good relationship with food, which leads to long-term dietary adherence. So your challenge now, if you accept it, go into the Total Transformation Toolkit, which is linked below, download it, figure out the amount of calories that you should be eating for your goals. Create a diet that's mainly minimally processed whole foods, high in protein, but when it comes to planning out your days, try and include something that's less nutritious into your macros during the week. And I say during the week because it's typically during the week where we feel like we've got to be on it, and then on the weekends all hell breaks loose, we're eating whole packs of Maryland cookies. So let's try and fit something in during the week so that come the weekend you're not thinking, man, I really want those cookies, and you're binging on them, and that's causing you to maybe go into a surplus for the week or just cancel your current phase of fat loss entirely. That's your challenge. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.